The Strength Beyond Struggle podcast brings you mental health stories from the front lines. We're sponsored by Ending the Silence, a program by the National Alliance for Mental Illness, NAMI, funded by the Arizona Healthcare Cost Containment System. We bring you the stories of people with lived experience. We do not offer therapy for any mental health condition and cannot substitute for professional assessment and treatment. In every episode, we deal with difficult mental health topics, including suicide. So if you're struggling, remember, you can always get help by calling 988. Welcome to the Strength Beyond Struggle podcast, and we're here with Kadi Tenney, a school counselor with Payson High School in Payson, Arizona. And we're going to talk to you today because you have a unique perspective as a school counselor on families and kind of what you called survival mode. So if we could sort of define that, because families have changed. It's not the, stay-at-home mom making dinner and making sure cookies are there when you get home from school anymore. Families are just not like that anymore.
Yeah, I mean, that happens, I think, still. I know of a few, but that's rare. So I think we were talking about different situations in which students come and are seeking help. And my response often to students who are frustrated because their parents don't understand them, or they just can't talk to their parents, or they're frustrated with their home situation. Often I try to help them find connection with their parents by being a little bit empathetic about their parents' situation. So sometimes, I ask questions like, well, who do you live with? Right? We start with that because it isn't always
a mom and a dad.
A mom and a dad. Very often it is just a mom or just a dad. Sometimes there's a step-parent involved.
Or grandparents.
Often,
right?
Yes. Especially in Payson right now, we have many students who are living with grandparents. So in that situation, there's a generation gap. And I had a grandparent once who came in to see me and said, I have no idea how to help my grandson. I love him so much, but we do not know how to talk to each other. He is struggling and I don't know how to help him. Please help me. I'll do anything you tell me to do. Just tell me what to do because I'm lost.
What a dear.
And he visited me regularly that year just to try to get some help and support, which was nice. But so sometimes I think students just don't understand maybe where their parent or guardian is coming from.
So what is it? What do you see that families are? What do you mean by the survival mode? Because that term is thrown around a lot in the mental health world about being in survival mode, and you're not able to thrive because you're in the survival mode. So
usually when I talk to students about survival versus thriving, I talk about a plant, and if a plant is just surviving, what does it look like? Versus if a plant is thriving, what does a thriving plant look like? So a surviving plant is, barely getting by. It's alive, but it's struggling. You can tell it's struggling. You can tell maybe at any moment it could go either way, right? It's sort of riding on lives.
Yeah.
But a thriving plant is flowering, maybe giving fruit, right? It's growing. It can give back more to those around it, right?
That's a beautiful way to look at it.
It's giving.
Yeah.
So sometimes, I think a lot of times, parents these days are more in survival mode where they're struggling to make ends meet. I mean, the economy is rough, right? A lot of parents are expensive. Food is expensive. Gas is expensive. Everything's expensive. Many are working more than one job, trying to raise kids. I remind my students that parenting is a very hard job, and this is their first time as parents, right? They're learning too. A lot of time they're in an emotional crisis. Maybe it's divorce. Maybe, they're lonely if they're a single parent. There's a lot of things that a parent could be going through that
makes it harder to be present with their child.
Makes it harder to be present and understanding and empathetic with their child because they're just trying to
They're too tired.
provide food for the table or,
Exactly.
just survive.
That's really hard. So, how does this, so in the past, I know in my family, I was blessed to have a mom who was at home,
Mm-hmm.
and I could always call her if I forgot my lunch, and she'd drive and bring it to me or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And we always had dinner. It was always a, very well balanced dinner because that was my mom's thing.
Mm-hmm.
But these kids nowadays, they really don't have that, do they?
I see a lot of students who, one of my first questions when they come in, if they're super anxious, I'll say, so tell me what you had for breakfast this morning. I usually start because a lot of times when you're elevated with anxiety, a lot of times there's exacerbated by the fact that you're hungry, right? All emotions are exacerbated when we're hungry. So I try to meet base level needs first. So, did you sleep last night? Have you had anything to eat this morning? So you're talking about well-balanced meal, and I'm laughing to myself thinking about the number of students who will say, well, I had a Red Bull and a donut on the way to school. I stopped at Circle K, I had a Red Bull and a donut, or something
You're
like
wondering
that.
why you're anxious.
Right. So definitely I think seeing less of that traditional well-balanced diet provided at home, just again, because I think a lot of parents are already at work. I had a student who was missing many, many days of school. I was very concerned. I called home, didn't get a hold of anyone, called again, many times. By the time I got a hold of Dad, he said, she hasn't been at school? Well, I wake her up every morning. I thought she was going to school. So he wakes her up, then he goes to work, then she goes back to sleep. And then by the time he gets home, it's as if she was at school, it's after, and he had no idea she wasn't going to school. Because he's busy. Again, he's in survival mode, and so is she.
Yes. How does that, what do you mean by that the child is then in survival mode too? Because the parent is that, do they pick up on it, or is it, well, they're hungry. They're
hungry for attention, hungry for some structure in their life. I mean, again, when you don't have anyone making sure you got up, making sure you got to school, making sure you ate breakfast, a lot of times we think teenagers especially should be much more capable than they actually are, but they're still developing humans. So they still need to be reminded to take a shower and eat. I mean, we laugh, but it's true. There are still a lot of cases of young people who are just need more. They need more structure and attention. And not all parents are able to provide that if they are, again, in survival mode, single parenting, working more than one job, and struggling themselves just to get through. Maybe they have their own mental health issues.
The reason I ask these questions is that in the other podcasts I've been doing with 20-somethings who are telling me their story of finding their mental health condition and then learning how to live with it. A lot of times mental family difficulties play a key role, and what makes me it's hard to say, how do you start to change those family patterns? Can the school play a role? Can counseling play a role? Have you seen that happen?
I think it's definitely important that we are aware. So, for example, this young lady I was talking about who wasn't getting up and Dad didn't know it, when we know the issue, then we can start to step in with extra services and resources. Our district social worker can step in with some resources for food, right? If that's a need. I think that we were able to arrange someone to pick up the young lady. She lived too far from the bus. She needed a ride to the bus. And so the bus wasn't an option. So she ended up getting a ride. I mean, we start to tap into resources there. Well, then once we're seeing her more at school and we understand maybe what her mental health needs are, then we can also tap into those kinds of resources. But it all starts with knowing what the issue is.
Right.
So I think that in those situations, we just, we're there to help. I think a lot of people don't know that we are a resource for help, and that if we come to us and understand.
You're not being punitive or anything. I don't get in trouble.
Oh no. Oh no. In fact, that's my favorite thing to tell kids. In the building at school, the administration is on the other side of the building and counsel straight across from us. And so when they come to counseling, we always say, this isn't the side of the building you come to if you're in trouble. This is the side you come to when you need help. So,
that's a beautiful way to look at it.
Yeah.
A safe space to go.
Exactly.
Where it's not judgmental, no matter what's going on at home. Because, again, I've heard some stories about some pretty scary stuff that can go on in homes. And it's not that you want to, it's a tricky subject because families are complicated and family issues are complicated. But these kids who grow up in these situations don't know what they don't know.
Right.
And they don't know that the neglect or the strife or the anger they're exposed to is actually can be damaging. But you can learn to, you can find help.
Right. Well, and learn to navigate, control what you can control and let go what you can't. I mean, excuse me, that's a huge part of our education is just, we can't change our parents. We can't change the way our boyfriend or girlfriend acts. You can't change anyone else, but you can make all of the choices for yourself.
Right.
About how you react, what you say, what you take in and what you let go. And so that's a huge piece of just basic education that we give students, and that you don't have to end up the way you were raised. You can break a cycle. So if there is abuse in your family, let's find some education. Let's find some an opportunity to reparent yourself, right? Through some counseling services or something, so that you can break the cycle and be the kind of parent that you wish you had. These kinds of things.
Because, I know from personal experience that trauma can add up and it comes out in weird ways, in unhealthy ways.
Yeah.
This is something that NAMI and Ending the Silence talks about a lot. People turn to drugs and alcohol to cope with their feelings, because it sounds like if a family's in survival mode, if I'm understanding correctly, there's miscommunication, there's misunderstanding, there's hurt, there's a lot of these negative feelings, and you build those up over time, and you got to relieve them some way.
Right.
And so, I guess, have you seen where, in the long run, finding someone and intervening and helping them out has actually turned a corner for them, where they've decided to take their own life into their own hands, take the advantage and learn and try something new and break the cycle?
I think that we're always sort of the starting point for that for students.
Correct.
I can't think of an example where we've seen it sort of all the way through necessarily, because sometimes we see them through to graduation and hope, right? And then that something good happens once they graduate, but we don't always hear back. But I can think of a student who, admitted to me that he was having a real struggle with his marijuana use and that he was using it to cope with the trauma that he'd had as a child at the hands of his parents. And of course, it's a coping mechanism and he has nothing else, or he hadn't learned anything else. That was all that he had at the moment. Again, back to the survival mode.
Was he getting in legal trouble because of this?
And so he was getting into some legal trouble, school trouble and some legal trouble. And also, he was having academic consequences. So even when he wasn't getting caught, even when he was using it judiciously and not getting caught with it at school or things, it was still affecting his attendance. It was affecting his potential to graduate. And he knew that he needed to graduate. He knew he wanted something better for his life. Like, he understood that his future was dependent on him graduating and creating something better for him.
How do you do that?
So, he came to me just saying, I don't know how to fix this. And at that point, it's really fun to have a talk with a student about the fact that this isn't about your marijuana use. This is about your trauma. If we address the trauma, you won't need the marijuana as much. You won't feel so dependent, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you can move forward. And so he was living with his grandma at the time. We invited grandma in. I talked with grandma about some of the resources that we have and that we could offer for him. And I really felt like his trauma needed something more than we have to offer in Payson. And so we, gave him a resource that was outside of Payson to, he just had a deep trauma that needed a higher level of care. And the last I heard, I got a hug from him a couple of months ago, and he's doing better, still working with a therapist and has a solid job and is doing better. So, yeah, I mean, I think that there's these stories again.
You can come out of it. In other words, just because you live in survival mode with your family doesn't mean that you are doomed to repeat it.
Right.
Or you have to, and you can find coping techniques to get through it that are not harmful to you.
You have the power of choice, right? We all can choose for ourselves. Like, no matter what happens at home, we have the power to choose for ourselves how we want to move forward, how to deal with it, how to thrive, how to find our own way to not just survive, but thrive.
And so you help your students kind of, it sounds like that one story with this guy, it's very inspiring that he, because to get in trouble with the law, it happens a lot with mental health conditions. A lot of people end up having brushes with the law. I mean, here in Healy County, 60% of our people in our jails have a mental health condition, but it often starts with the anxiety and depression and what you're seeing.
Sure.
And what are some of the warning signs for students, and what when should they start asking questions, do you think, if they're uncomfortable? I mean, I'm not sure how they start, because when I was younger, I didn't know that I was struggling at home. But then I ended up using an unhealthy coping technique of bulimia for many years to find my way through, which had all of its own consequences. So what, and I would have been embarrassed because I thought, well, my family is perfect. I don't need to ask questions, but I was still not doing well. I mean, I don't know. Is there something people...
I think we all know what the unhealthy, in this day and age, there's enough education out there. We all know what the unhealthy coping mechanisms are. Like at this point, right? Our kids know that vaping and, drugs, alcohol, harm, sexual things, right? They're different. There's so many different ways that they're trying to cope, right? Cutting, right?
Right.
Punching walls, right?
Okay.
Your eating disorders. I mean, there's a lot of different unhealthy ways that we're coping. We're just, again, trying to survive. We're using some kind of tool to feel some kind of control, to get some kind of peace, to cope with whatever it is that we're dealing with. And I think that that's the sign. When we start seeing the signs of these unhealthy coping mechanisms, we know that there's something going on that we need help dealing with. We need to be able to understand, what is it that's driving me to these coping mechanisms? What is it that's keeping me from handling this in a healthier way?
So, do you have any questions, like, because only 1 out of 5 people has what's needed for a mental health condition. So it's like 20% of the population tends to have the problems, but the other 80% are the friends of those people. So most of us are friends of these kind of people. Do you see friends of students that are in distress coming to you? And when they come to you, what do they say? Or how do they play a role in the process?
Absolutely. We probably once a week get a friend who comes in and says, I'm really worried about my friend because she said that, she wants to hurt herself. Or she's always wearing long sleeves, and the other day I accidentally saw when she was taking her hoodie off and she's got these cuts on her arm. Or, my friend keeps talking about how sad she is since her mom passed, and she's just I'm worried about her because sometimes she just can't get out of bed.
Wow.
So we definitely get those.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there are probably many more who are worried and feeling those feelings about their friends who don't know that they can come to us for help, or who don't have a trusted adult in their life that they feel safe going to with that kind of thing. I would love for more kids to understand that it is safe to go to school counselors. We are a confidential space. We are trained. We try to always explain that the confidentiality is only broken if there is a declaration of harm to self or someone else, or if someone's harming them, right?
Okay.
And then um, we only tell someone who can be helpful to that situation.
Cannot escalate the situation.
Right.
De-escalate and find solutions in a safe way.
Right.
So long as their safety is always
Right.
paramount, they have to understand that. But
Right.
any ideas, just quick thoughts, any ideas on how we might be able to break that shame the barrier, or I don't know, just, I guess, talk about it more?
Yeah, I think we just have to talk about it more. Kids are doing, I think, a lot more talking because of social media. Social media is doing a good job of helping students understand that it's not safe, it's not okay, and that if they're worried, they need to tell someone. If they're worried about themselves, if they're worried about someone else. So I think that that's, been very helpful to us. Way more kids are talking about it these days than I ever talked about it when I was in high school.
Yes, I've noticed that.
And so I think that that's one of the positive products of social media.
It's not going to say one.
Yeah.
There's one thing.
There is positive education that can happen.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. And I hope that listening today, that people got a little idea that, it's hard when you live in your family and you don't know anything else. You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping that by watching something like this and listening to your stories, that they can understand that if you feel unsafe, it's okay to go to your school counselor and just say something's going on, and you guys will walk them through it.
Yeah.
And be there for them.
Yep. Any struggle you might be having. Yep. Whether it's safety or just uncertainty of any point, of any kind. Yeah. We are happy to talk with students. We love to talk to students.
Wonderful. And thank you for your stories and your time today.
Thank you for having me.
So the family is in crisis. Divorce, job loss, homelessness, illness, and even death. Kadi Tenney sees the results every day as a school counselor. Sometimes a good student's grades drop off the edge. Maybe they start ditching school or fall asleep in class. Tenney looks for these warning signs. She knows it often signals that another family is living in survival mode. Researchers have increasingly focused how family crisis affects kids. The concept of survival mode is still kind of new, though, so the research is still evolving. But consider how much impact even simple family habits can have on kids. For instance, one study published in Adolescent Health asked a very simple question. What impact does it have on a kid if a family often sits down to dinner? Well, you'd be amazed. I sure was. The combination of frequent family dinners and good communications with parents protects kids from a long list of problems. It also improves emotional well-being, positive social interactions, and even life satisfaction. Family meals had an impact regardless of gender, grade level, or family wealth. Another study in Canadian Family Physician came to a very similar conclusion. Those researchers combined results from 14 different studies. Frequent family meals reduced eating disorders, drug and alcohol use, violent behavior, depression, and thoughts of suicide. That family time also increased self-esteem and school success. I bring this up to underscore the critical role of family relationships on teenagers. The pandemic spawned a bunch of studies on what happens when families go into survival mode. One study found that the pandemic thrust many families into crisis thanks to job loss, illness, and even death in the family. Family members all coped with stress, anxiety, depression, and physical symptoms. Social support could only soften the impact. In another 2022 study, the Kaiser Family Foundation documented the mental health crisis. The survey found that 28% of American families have faced trauma due to the mental illness of a family member. 1 in 5 said a family member had overdosed and ended up in the hospital. About 16% said a family member was homeless due to a mental health problem. 1 in 4 said a family member was inflicting self-harm, like cutting themselves. And a tragic 16% said a family member had died by suicide. That's a lot of trauma and a lot of living in survival mode. And that's why we're taking NAMI's Ending the Silence program into schools. We need to talk about that trauma, and we need to help families. So talk to your schools about bringing ETS to the district and get out of survival mode by getting help. You can start at a NAMI support group or class. Check our website at strengthbeyondstruggle.org for a class near you and help us end the silence.
It's okay to just be me. We're all made to be unique. It's okay to have my needs. It's okay to be me. What's easy for others are struggles for me. I do things differently. Doesn't make me broken. It just makes me me. People out there help me through, ones who care about me and you. Through my struggles I find my strength. Feels so good to be me. What's easy for others are struggles for me. I do things differently. Doesn't make me broken. It just makes me me. People helping me to get through have their own struggles too. Even though they have their strength, they are human like me. Through these struggles we build our strength. We all want to feel healthy. Even though we make mistakes, struggles build our strength.